as we welcome in the former executive producer of Hockey Night in Canada, his show 100% Hockey with Darren Millard, the most famous man from Oliver, British Columbia, John Shannon. How are you?
Wasn't that Blake holding the pin there? No, it wasn't Blake?
It was not. No, I
forgot to shave.
I'm not usually around the pin.
Yeah.
No.
Very good.
You were holding it.
Very good. You had Rick Tocchet on your show, John, and he seems to have been made aware, and he seems sensitive to the word quit here in Vancouver. Tell us the story.
Yeah, so 100% Hockey, which is available in the same platforms that you guys are available for, other than YouTube. The amazing thing was we had a really good discussion about the future. And then at the end of the conversation, my pal Millard said, really happy for you in Philadelphia. And I said, you may be happy for him in Philadelphia, but there's a lot of people not happy in Vancouver. At which point, Rick jumped in and said, John, you got to tell your friends and the people in Vancouver that I am not a quitter. It's in the last 7 or 8 minutes of the podcast, but he specifically mentioned that he's not a quitter, that he loved his time in Vancouver. And it was just a set of circumstances that saw him leave. But he was very, very pointed to tell people that he was not leaving under any pretense that he was unhappy with in Vancouver. Whether you believe that or not, I was shocked that he, without being prompted, said, I am not a quitter.
There aren't many head coaches that willingly, there's a lot of coaches that are fired after 2.5 years. We tried to come up with a list just off the top of our heads of coaches that have just walked away from head coaching jobs after just 2 seasons, and it's a pretty short list with a lot of extenuating circumstances, personal leaves and all that sort of stuff, but not really just cuz, which is sort of what Rick Tocchet did. I mean, that's a pretty unique circumstance for him to leave. He may not like the word quit, but I don't know what word is appropriate for these circumstances because it doesn't happen often.
I don't know what other word is possible, really, particularly when you think about the passion in Vancouver, the love of the team.
Yeah.
And I think until the moment we heard the results of the decision that he was not going to accept the offer, I think most people felt pretty good about Rick Tocchet and thought Tocchet was the right guy in a right place. So to me, without passing judgment, because when you're doing an interview like that, it's difficult to do it, and they're doing it really trying to be nice to you to sit down and talk with you for 45 minutes. But for him to say, I am not a quitter, really jumped out at me.
Did you get a sense, John, did he reveal like what was the major issue with coming back to Vancouver?
No, that's the easy thing. When you signed a new contract, it's easy to move on. And we didn't, I don't recall, and we specifically said, why did you leave? But he just said it was time to move on to something that he wanted. And I suggested that he had to go on and leave because he was happy. He needed to be happy. And he didn't disagree with that.
Which underlines the kind of year the Canucks just had on and off the ice, isn't it? Because they are top of the world a year from now, or a year ago from now. Right, just 12 months ago, they're on top of the world. They lost in the second round. They felt like they won the cup in a lot of ways. And in 12 months, John, he needs to find a happier spot, and it certainly felt like that.
Yeah, no, Blake, you're bang on. I think that I think the frustration of the season wore on everybody in the organization. You know that. And Rick was not alone. He did have nice things to say about Adam Foote. He thought Adam was going to do a good job because he's such a great communicator. So there are some, maybe there is a silver lining that they have a coach that A, wants to be in Vancouver, and B, can work his miracles with a defense. Hopefully they can find some coaches that can manage the forwards in this scenario and see this team start to score goals again.
John, you're a native British Columbian. You have followed this team for the Well, the entirety of its NHL existence.
October
right?
9th, 1970, boys.
That's right. From the draft wheel that got them Dale Talon instead of Gilbert Perreault to everything that happened this past year. Don Taylor calls it impending doom. John, do you believe the Vancouver Canucks are cursed? Can you assure our audience and Canucks fans that brighter days are ahead here, or are they forever cursed and destined to be undone?
This might be the town that grips the stick too hard and wants it too bad. Listen, I have enjoyed as a fan and as a broadcaster and as a professional in the hockey TV industry, I have enjoyed the highs of the Vancouver Canucks as much as anyone, and can regale you in the first time they made the playoffs in 1975, and never forget a 5-game series against the Montreal Canadiens. So the answer is there can be good days ahead. Mm-hmm. It's different in 2025 than it was in 75, than it was in 82, than it was in 94. Heck, it's even different than 2011. Although 2011, you could see the with the roots of social media and all the passion that came out in the streets, you could see that this fan base is one of the greatest in the history of the National Hockey League, and with that comes peril. And hopefully with that, at some point comes pride, but it all takes patience.
Whose curse is worse, Vancouver's or Toronto's? Because Toronto's is actually longer in terms of Stanley Cup droughts, just by virtue of their existence. And the Canucks have gotten far closer. They've been to the Cup final 3 times in the 50-odd years. The Leafs have not. So the two biggest English-speaking populations have equal curses? Whose is worse?
I think Toronto's worse. I think Toronto's worse because I don't see the length of despair of playoff utility in Vancouver that I've seen here and witnessed here.
Canucks have had some charges. They've had some goes.
Well, and they have, for the most part, and I don't have my calendar here of every year, but for the last 30 years they have made the playoffs more than the Maple Leafs had. Remember from 2004, the Maple Leafs didn't make the playoffs for 12 years. The angst that is a Maple Leaf fan, to me, I don't think there's anything in hockey comparable to it. And I think the only two teams that come out and you talk about and put in the same sentence are the Cubs and the Red Sox. Those are the only two teams of that vintage. Maybe the Cleveland Indians, boys.
Yeah.
But certainly not hockey.
Yeah, I was going to say, and in the case of Boston and Chicago, their curses are done.
Well, which is why people should always have hope.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why,
it's funny because the Canucks fan will argue that, no, we're harder done by than the Leafs fan. And really, the Leafs fan should just say the Harold Ballard era and drop the mic because you were missing playoffs when 16 of 21 got in. Or
you were making the playoffs with 63 points and getting eliminated in the first round, so.
Right. Which brings me to the bigger question. I think you alluded to it. Do you believe there is undue pressure and that it's a competitive hurdle in an NHL market, with the Oilers potentially on the verge, right, of ending the 32-year Canadian Cup drought? But do you believe there is added pressure, the added noise becomes a competitive hurdle, actually something that Canadian clubs have to get over that American clubs or smaller market, less hockey loving markets don't have?
I would be shocked. I really would. I think that players that eventually migrate to Canadian teams do it because they love it. Do it because they want to play here. They want to play in the spotlight. They want the greatness of the situation. I think that there's a whole horde of players that have said, can you imagine if we win in Toronto, if we win in Vancouver, that we will live for the, what's the famous Fred Shiro line, right? Win today and walk together forever. I think that's what, if that's pressure, then there's pressure. But I think that when you look at what guys like Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl or Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor in Winnipeg and Cole Caulfield in Montreal, I think they relish the playing in these cities. They relish the adoration, and I don't know if that's pressure or not. But it's funny, and we've seen this more on the coaching and managerial side, and we seen it at Vancouver. Bruce Boudreau wanted to come home to Canada because he wanted to be the number one sport in town, not the number 5 sport. Didn't want to be an afterthought like he was in Washington and to a lesser extent in Minnesota, and certainly an afterthought in Anaheim. Jim Rutherford came home to prove that he could do this in Canada, not in Carolina or Pittsburgh. People come home because of the greatness of the game here, and because this will, make their legacy even that much greater by winning in Canada. Cliff Fletcher, I know it's ancient history now, but Cliff Fletcher moved from Calgary to Toronto because he knew that if he could turn the Toronto Maple Leafs around, he would be a saint in Toronto forever. And look how close his teams came, and they didn't even get to the Stanley Cup final, and people are still talking about the Doug Gilmour Toronto Maple Leafs. That's what it's all about.
We're going to talk CBA in a second here, and it's not going to be in this CBA agreement, that's for damn sure. But could you make the argument that the league is less than because they don't have a juggernaut Canadian franchise that, especially
they might.
Well, we'll see. But a juggernaut big market, even, like, should there be a luxury tax where if the Rangers, Leafs, and even to a lesser degree Vancouver Canucks, who are amongst the probable earners on any given year,
yep.
Should they be allowed to pay a luxury tax that gets distributed to the other member clubs to go above the cap to a certain degree? They make the more money than everybody else. Why shouldn't they be able to spend it?
You could make that argument, but that's not going to hold any water with the people in charge. It's the great equalizer. We see it every year that there's 2 or 3 good players that have to get moved, and then it creates that word of parity around the league. And that's why, by the way, people in Edmonton, Blake, might think they do have the juggernaut. When you go to the Stanley Cup final 2 years in a row and come within a goal of winning the Stanley Cup and now have home ice advantage, this may be it. It's if that was the case, Blake, the issues that we're seeing in baseball, because we are seeing them in baseball, and in the 80s and 90s, it was the Yankees could buy anybody. Now it's the Dodgers can buy anybody. Do we want that in hockey, or do we want all 32 teams? Now they don't have a cap in baseball. But they do have revenue sharing, and we have a cap in hockey, and we also have revenue sharing. So these are the Vancouver Canucks, the Toronto Maple Leafs, Montreal, Edmonton, the Rangers, Detroit, a few of the other big clubs, Philadelphia. They've been financing the bottom 10 for a long time.
And really, with these expected jumps, and I keep calling them expected because we don't have a CBA, so
no, but that's going to happen. That's going to happen.
No, I yes, absolutely should. These jumps, I think, are going to price some teams out of the upper limit. I do see a world where your Ottawas, your Winnipegs, your Columbuses, some of the smaller, aren't going to be able to spend right to the limit anymore. So we'll see how the league does with that. What I'm interested in your take is on the income tax-free jurisdictions and Matt Larkin had the tweet last week from the Daily Faceoff. So it's 6 of 32. So it's just shy of 19% of NHL teams are without state income tax.
Right.
And they've earned nearly 63% of the conference final berth since 2020. So, no one is saying the Florida Panthers are there just because of state income tax. I hate when the argument is reduced to black and white for the simple minds. No. It is one factor within many. Florida is very well managed. And I also hate the fact, when people say, oh, well, look back at the previous 20 years. Well, I mean, that rejects the notion that this could be a recent phenomenon. You tell me, there's 26 franchises on one side of the ledger here. John, could you see them pushing for some sort of equalization, some sort of way to be able to account for the fact that these 6 franchises, the Florida teams and others, are able to sell their players on no state income tax and extract additional value?
It's what many people are saying about this Yanni Gourde contract extension too, right? That's equal to $4 million elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
Well, between the two places that Gourde last played, Seattle and now Tampa, neither had it. So I mean,
correct.
So it's a fascinating discussion. I remember having this with a few people in the league office when I was there, and that was a long time ago. And really, what the answer was then is that every franchise has advantages. I mean, the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Vancouver Canucks have great advantages working in hardcore hockey markets where people pay dollars, where people pay big dollars to watch the game, and there are corporate partners and sponsors are lined up to be in and amongst the Maple Leafs and the Canucks and ownership. They don't have those same issues in Florida. They don't have those same issues in Tampa, although Tampa's done a magnificent job as a business. Arizona was a tax-free state for all intents and purposes. It was, less than 1%. How did that work? It didn't. Really, the strength of those teams right now that are winning, that are in tax-free states, are the people running them. This is a very subjective business, and this is why the cap was put in place initially, was to say, and this is not a direct quote from the commissioner, but this was to say, we're going to let the people with hockey strength decide who wins, not just the person with the biggest wallet. And so the cap came in, and what happened was the teams who are creative, teams that had great scouts, great coaching, great managers, in theory, were supposed to win the Stanley Cup. And that, for all intents and purposes, was when you look at what Stan Bowman did in Chicago those years, by being forced to remove bodies, and what Jim Rutherford did in Pittsburgh. Those are the great equalizers.
No doubt, no doubt. You don't win a Stanley Cup without good management, without good players, without good coaching. When do we look around and say, okay, it's more than just cyclical? It's something that's deeper, that's more rooted, and that we're going to have to address, because, of course, if you don't address it between now and the next CBA, John, then it becomes more difficult, and it's going to continue for the duration of the next CBA. Speaking of, there was some hope it might be done by the Commissioner's State of the League address Wednesday at the Stanley Cup Final, but I guess no hope.
Well, I don't know.
No hope on that. Unless they have it really well guarded as a secret here.
They have.
We're going to go into the summer.
Both sides have been very, very secretive about this, and both sides have been, been talking a lot. I mean, we had Marty Walsh on our show last week, and he was very optimistic that things were going to get done. Gary was on the show a month ago, and he was optimistic things were going to get done. There doesn't appear to be many obstacles. The one thing you do wonder that it's going to jump out is how are they going to manage the long-term injury stuff when it comes to players that live on LTIR until the playoffs. Is it the Kucherov rule or the Evander Kane rule? How do you do that? Do you put LTIR into the playoffs somehow? What equation would you do? Right now, it's not in that equation because, in theory, you don't pay the players in the playoffs. So what happens to that? I actually think that's a bigger issue for the whole league than I do think the state tax issue.
But the players are on that side of it too. Like both sides seem to want it. The team wants it for the competitive advantage, and like Evander Kane signed up for that, right? He would have made a stink. They're on that side as well. Who's against it?
The teams they feel that feel they lost out.
Right.
LCIR.
We didn't have a guy who was kind of nicked and old.
But the Players Association in this one is, it's on both sides. You know that as well as I do.
Yeah.
So it's like when there's a player safety hearing. They have to represent both players.
Right.
So they have to be involved on both sides. But that to me is one where you say that I do think that there might be some traction. But again, you never know. It's what are the players prepared to give up for that? Or if they're not insisting on that, what are the owners and the commissioner prepared to give up? We're still in the middle of a negotiation when it comes to the CBA, and it is tit for tat so many times.
So the conference finals wrapped up Thursday, John, and the Stanley Cup final starts Wednesday. Blake and I talk about this every year. We hear from our audience every year going, what do you mean they need that long between? From a television perspective, which of course you ran at one point, what's ideal here as a break between the end of the conference finals and the start of the Stanley Cup final? And is there a risk of waiting too long and just having people forget and go about their summer?
There is a bit of a risk, but I will tell you that with this matchup, with these two teams, with the history of last year's 7-game series, I fully suspect once the people start to arrive in Edmonton and the Panthers arrive on Tuesday, I think the hype is going to be out of this world. And I think that, we get game 1 on Wednesday, game 2 on Friday. I think people will be slowly getting reinterested in the Stanley Cup final because it's going to be great hockey. It's got great names. And that's exactly what happened last year, Matt. It was a slow start to the ratings. And by the time Game 7 occurred, it was 7.6 million people in Canada. More people watched Game 7 than watched the Four Nations face-off that we're given credit for being a game changer.
The 2-day breaks that are the between almost every game except for the first two.
Yeah.
Is that just because of the distance, or do you think if it was, two teams much closer in proximity, do you think it still would have been laid out as it is?
I do. I do think that this is probably getting it back on schedule for ABC's primetime lineup. And that's not a negative. That's a reality.
Yeah.
So TNT's primetime lineup.
TNT does that.
ABC has the basketball. So you don't want to go head to head with the basketball. You want to have alternate night stuff. So that's in the essence when Steve Hatzopetrus from the league office is talking to both networks and talking to the people at the NBA. When are your dates? When are our dates? And nobody wants the competition.
Hot take: TNT should bring in Charles Barkley on the
I
panel.
Wouldn't be surprised if he shows up in the Florida games.
Yeah,
I would not be surprised that if Charles is around for games 3 and 4 and game 6 if it gets that far.
They should bring him in. They should make him involved with every game. I mean, the amount of time that he spends now on Inside the NBA, which of course is no more after the
well, it is, but
finals.
It's different.
It's moving. Yes, it's no more on TNT. The amount of time he spends talking about hockey. I was watching hockey last night, looking forward to this. He, of course, is an avowed now fan of the Canadian teams,
and there's Shaq Hyman too. So
and needless to say, he's a fantastic promoter. And
well, in fact, the other night, I think it was Game 4. He actually on the Inside the NBA, he gave the panel a quiz about logos, And Draymond Green was on the panel that night too. And it was about 4.5 minutes of showing 5 or 6 NHL logos.
No kidding.
And it ended with the mammoth because that was the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
And it was, and I actually sent it to a couple guys at the league office saying, this was the best thing that I've seen in a long time, because it's not for the hardcore. It's for the people who aren't hockey fans, and maybe they'll come over for a period and
Take a peek.
Yeah.
Because once you take a peek at our game, you get hooked. You get hooked.
Yeah, and Ernie Johnson now throws to Charles for all the promos for the NHL. It's like it's the damnedest thing. He's been branded as the hockey guy at
He loves the Oilers.
CNC on the basketball. Yeah, he does.
loves the
Yeah, he
Oilers.
does. Yep. Marvelous stuff, John. Thanks for the time here this week. We will catch up next week.
Hit them straight, boys.